To this week's parenting class. It's been exciting to hear what's going on and what you guys are being taught. If I haven't met you yet, I'm Ryan Kelly. I'm the preaching pastor here. My wife Sarah is over there. We've got 4 kids, 23 down to 18, so 2 in college and 2 out of college. And we've enjoyed parenting over the years, and it's been hard, but God's been in it, and we've seen fruit. And so it's a good topic to talk about, even if you forget some things. So it's a good thing for me to kind of think back to things we used to do and things we used to think about we do these days, or at least in a different way with older kids. So tonight we're going to talk about shared expectations and obedience. But don't forget what's come before. Don't forget what's come before in, especially the one before with Chase last week. He talked about the heart, getting to the heart of matters. And so don't forget the heart. Don't think that that's now behind us or something. Don't know about that or that I have a different approach. Tonight we're focusing on obedience. And so we'll have to assume things that Chase talked about last week about the heart, like need to get to the heart and how to expose the heart and the necessity of kids seeing their heart for the sake of the gospel and how the gospel is the only possible solution for their hearts. All that I agree with. I wholeheartedly agree with and underscore it. But tonight we'll have to sort of assume that and dig deeper down on obedience. Next week, Drew will drill down deeper on discipline. And obviously, you probably noticed already, these things all overlap. There's a sense in which if we had the time, if we had the schedules, we could just go from one session to the next, to the next, to the next. And there'd probably be more continuity or less overlap if we did it that way. But our schedules don't allow for that. And so hopefully you're served by doing multi-weeks, hour at a time, one topic at a time. Knowing that some things are assumed because we talked about them already. Something we're going to get to, we haven't gotten to yet, but will in upcoming weeks. Let me pray and we'll get started. Oh Lord, we thank you for children entrusted to us and those in this room who haven't yet had children, but perhaps in your timing will. Lord, we pray great steward or will give to you. We pray for your help. We pray for wisdom. We pray for clarity. We pray for, Lord, for presence with us and your power within us. We just pray for you, Lord, to keep us from sin, to keep from ways less than helpful or even harmful. And clarity. Children well. So be with us as we'll give you all the glory. In this name, amen. 2 caveats up front. I'll aim mostly at parents of younger kids. I know there'll be some sessions later on that get more age specific and then talk about teenage years and those things. So there's no way around. Vague to talk about obedience. I'll just have to talk about obedience. I think probably crucial where it gets injected, where authority and obedience begins to, present it, at least questions. If you want to ask a question about your later kids at the end. So that's my second caveat is, if you would, save your questions to the end. That'll give us, I think, a little bit better time management, and then I'll save at least 10 minutes at the end for questions. So if you're thinking of something as we're working through this, jot down a question, and hopefully we'll have time to answer it at the end. All right, I'm going to scribble on this board here and give you something of an outline. Here's the first thing we're going to talk about why obedience. Why obedience? Let's not assume that, right? And that's already been touched on in previous talks. I think maybe it was the last talk that touched on why would we expect kids to obey when we know they don't yet have regenerate hearts? How can they really obey? What can we really expect of non-Christian children? Well, here are a few reasons. Why we should pursue obedience, why we should expect obedience, why we should discipline for disobedience of our kids even at a young age. Well, learning obedience young usually carries a lifetime of benefits. Learning it young usually carries a lifetime of benefits. And the converse is true. Not learning obedience young usually brings a lifetime of difficulty. And there are all kinds of proverbs about that. We'll look at one or two of them this evening. It's also for their safety. For their safety. I mean, you want to be able to say something very quick to a child and have their attention that it might save their lives. A car's coming and they're in the street. They're about to put their finger in the electrical socket or something like that. It's also for their peace. When expectations are clear and there's love from mom and dad, and then there's obedience from kids, there's peace and safety. It's a good thing. It's good inwardly, it's good outwardly, it's good for mom and dad's sanity. That's one of the reasons. There's a proverb for that. We'll look at it in a bit. It's for mom and dad's sanity. It also trains them to obey their heavenly Father. As they get more instinctive in obeying mom and dad, they might have greater impulses along with the gospel, along with grace, assuming a regenerate heart one day. It can still be used as it was like backloaded in their earlier years to train them toward obedience that might be put to work toward their heavenly Father. It also has some relationship to the gospel. Now here's where we got to be careful, because hopefully, if you've been to this church for a while, you know obedience doesn't get people saved. It's not in the equation. It's after the equation, right? It's not gospel plus obedience equals salvation. It's faith alone, grace alone equals salvation, which produces good works or obedience to God. But, let me say this. This is not a salvation formula per se, but there's some relationship in the Proverbs about parents training their children to fear the Lord for their eternal good, not just for their temporary good, not just for their adult good. I'm not exactly sure what the connection is. Is it perhaps used by God, is obedience in a young person's life used by God to eventually draw them into Himself? Maybe. All I'm saying is that in Proverbs, there's this connection between train them well, and by God's grace, assuming the gospel that we believe, that's faith alone, grace alone, they might have eternal good, right? And again, I'm not trying to parse that out specifically, but there is some relationship to the gospel in even our kids' early obedience. And here's really the biggest one. God calls on our children to obey their parents actually as an extension of obeying Him. Now that sounds incorrect. That sounds impossible. That sounds like, blasphemy. Except it's in the Bible. So I wouldn't have thought of saying it that way, but the Bible puts it that way. And so we're going to turn to the Bible. Turn to Ephesians 6. And someone who has a good, loud voice for us, male or female, read Ephesians 6, 1 through 4 for us. And then after it's read, we're just going to keep that text open before us, and we're going to just take it a phrase at a time. Who'd read it for us? 1 through 4 of Ephesians 6. Okay.
Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Your father and mother, this is the first commandment with atonement, that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. Fathers, do not provoke your children
There it is. All right, keep it in front of you. Look down. Look at verse 1. Children, God, through the Apostle Paul, is directly addressing children of Christian parents in the church of Ephesus, and by extension, us who read it today. So children, obey your parents. What kind of parents are we talking about? Parents in the Lord. It's really not clear in the Greek whether this is parents in the Lord or how you obey them. Obey them in the Lord. It could be either one. Maybe it's both. Paul likes to do those double intended meanings. Obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. So there's another reason. Reasons for obedience. Remember, we're given that list. We'll keep coming back to that list, and you can, if you want to add to it, and if you're taking notes, great. Here it is. It's right, God says. Through Paul, it's right. Now, in the Colossians passage of this, Colossians 3:20, Paul says there, children, obey your parents, and he adds this, in everything. In everything. So not when kids think it's right, not when they get it, not when it's what they want to do, not when it seems consistent with what Brother Johnny got to do, etc., etc. Children, obey your parents in the Lord. Children directly commanded by God through the Apostle Paul to obey in the Lord, these parents in the Lord. This is right, and do it in everything. Now, what's the definition of obedience? We're talking about obedience, but let's not assume a definition of it. Definition. Did I spell that right? No. E-F-I. There we go. Definition. Don't ask this. Don't answer this out loud, but think, what is your definition of obedience for children? What's your family's definition of obedience? Do you know what it is? Is it agreed upon in your house? Do your kids know what it is? I think they should. In our home, we used to say, and the kids could say it with us, obedience is immediately, happily unto the Lord. Immediately, happily unto the Lord. Unto the Lord, you can't always tell when they're doing it unto the Lord, but we wanted to put that in there so that they knew this isn't just horizontal obedience, this is worshipful obedience as well. Correct me if I'm wrong, Drew. Isn't the Hodges saying, right away, all the way, with a happy heart? That's great. Right away, all the way, with a happy heart. Which means that, think of like what those kind of definitions of obedience cut out. Counting to 3 probably wouldn't fit in either of those definitions. You can have your own definition, but whatever you come up with, you got to think through where that behavior is falling outside the bounds of what you're expecting, what you have defined as obedience. Counting to 3 would be one that's not. Bribing a child is not obedience. Simply ignoring their disobedience is not them obeying. Especially when they're really young, sometimes you physically force them. I said, come here. I said, come here. Well, you pick them up and you move them over. Well, you're stronger, and they got moved geographically, but they didn't obey. Or even obedience with a bad attitude. Obedience with a bad attitude would not fit within immediately happily unto the Lord, or right away, all the way, with a happy heart. So do your kids know what you expect them to do, especially when you're telling them something to do? Do they really understand what you're saying? Do they really understand what you're telling them not to do at any given point? Do they understand what that looks like? Is there a definition in your family of obedience? Is it agreed upon? Well, you don't get your kids to agree upon it. Never mind that. But do they know it? And can you come back to it? Can you say, hey, what is obedience? And then they say it to you, immediately, happily unto the Lord. Well, was that immediately? No. So now we're at least, we're talking about the nitty-gritty of where they are disobeying. And of course, look at Ephesians 6 again. Look at verse 2. It's not just obey. It's not just Colossians 3, obey in everything, but Ephesians 6, to honor your father and mother. And so here we've got this thing, this immediately happily unto the Lord, or doing it with a happy heart. What that's trying to get at is this thing of honoring mom and dad. So not just outward actions. If the command is, I need you to come here, and they move geographically, even immediately, but they stomp like this on the way there, or they plop down, you can think of all the different things, the inner protest, the body moved, but the face clearly shows an inner protest that needs to be confronted. That's not obedience. We can expect more of our kids than that. And let me just pause here. It doesn't exactly fall under honor of mother and father, but I want to put it somewhere, and this is as good a place as any. You can and you should teach your kids to control their emotions. I know it seems hard. It may seem impossible, but I want to tell you it's not impossible. It is hard, but it's not impossible. And it's part of what God calls your children to do. It's part of honoring. It's not just part of honoring. So let's just think of just emotions. And yes, kids, they have less of a grip on their emotions sometimes than adults do. But actually what we're trying to do is help them with that. We're trying to help them. And this is actually one of the best ways we can serve them and prepare them for adulthood. Adults who have no control of their emotions, they have a hard time in life. They have a hard time in relationships. They have a hard time in jobs. They have a hard time. They have a hard time just being themselves and being alone. So this is a really big way we can help our kids move towards healthy adulthood, never mind honoring God and obeying Him with our hearts. And if it just seems crazy to you, like control your emotions, emotions just happen. You can't really control your emotions. You control actions. No, the Bible commands emotions left and right. Now, it assumes our emotions are in one place sometimes and need to move to another place at that time, right? So be joyful, rejoice always. Again, I say rejoice. Who needs to hear that command from Philippians 4? Not those who are rejoicing, but those who need to rejoice. The Bible commands proper wrestling with our wrong emotions all the time. So hopefully, as a parent, that isn't foreign to you. But I just needed to say, yeah, the Bible actually does command emotions. If it commands it of us, then in something like the command of our kids to honor their mother and father, it's also commanding them to start to work toward their actual feelings as they obey. All right, so notice verse 2, Ephesians 6. We're still working through this a phrase at a time. It says, this is the first commandment with a promise. What's the promise? Verse 3, that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. So this is quoting the Old Testament, and it's saying it goes well for you when you obey mom and dad and honor them, and it doesn't go well for you when you don't obey mom and dad and honor them. Ultimately, it doesn't go well. So you can think of immediate consequences, and we would often tell this to our kids, reminding them of this verse. We would say, this isn't going well for you, is it? Like, you got this discipline. This isn't going well for you, is it? We'd remind them of that. That's short-term, immediate consequences of sin. But obviously, the Old Testament, and Proverbs especially, isn't shy about connecting that all the way from childhood to, let me get real blunt, because the Proverbs do, of a guy dead in a field with crows eating his eyes out. That's where it goes, right? That's where it goes. It can go from not obeying mom and dad to not obeying these teachers to not obeying that police officer to being dead in a field and crows eating your eyes out. Now, that's not being dramatic. That's not trying to scare you, a wrong way. That's a biblical warning of where it goes. So kids, just get this. Kids getting used to saying no, kids getting used to being against authority is a scary thing. So we've got to ask what this behavior at age 4 or 5 looks like at 12, what it looks like at 16, and what it looks like at 23. The kid who is pounding the ground at age 6, it doesn't look good at 23. So that doesn't mean, that's where they're destined to go, in the field, crows eating their eyes out. Oh no, by God's grace, no. But let's take this seriously. This temper tantrum right now is serious, and we need to deal with it seriously. Proverbs 29:15 relates to this. It says, "A child left to himself brings shame to his mother." So just picture that, a child left to himself. Do nothing, shame to mom, dead in a field, crows eating your eyes out. Proverbs 29:15. So a child left to himself. The opposite of parenting is a child left to himself, which means parents should be hands-on and having a plan and pursuing it by God's standards and His Word. Look at verse 4 of Ephesians 6. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger. We got to figure out what that means. That's important. So here's how not to parent. It's a negative statement. In Colossians 3, this is added, lest they become discouraged. So provoking them to anger discourages them. That helps piece together what this might mean. And then let me give you some examples. You could think of hundreds of examples, but here are just some examples that I thought of, and maybe they're useful to you. What does it mean to provoke a child to anger, or what are some ways parents provoke a child to anger and discourage them? Of course, physical abuse or even excessive discipline. A parent being unrighteously angry, aggravated, and short-tempered. Inconsistency in the expectations or in the discipline, or inconsistency between mom's parenting and dad's parenting. Unrealistic goals, maybe not age-appropriate goals. We'll talk more about that later on. Sometimes setting them up for failure. We don't intend to set them up for failure, but there are some times where, I'll just give you the most common one, and we've had it, and we hopefully got sick of it, so we grew from it and didn't do it anymore. But staying too late at someone's house when your kids are little is setting them up for failure. You know it. We've all done it. We've all seen it. You stay longer than you should, and you can see that kid getting frustrated with toys, and I want this, and give me that cake, and you know it's coming, and sure enough, it's the meltdown that takes place. Well, mom and dad would have best served their child to get them out before they got that tired, number one, no matter how great the conversation at the party's going. In number two, you can always do this, especially when kids are a little bit older than, say, 2 or 3. Maybe at 4 and 5, you can say, we're leaving in 5 minutes. We're leaving in 5 minutes. Just that kind of stuff. The alternatives, I think, are somewhat our responsibility, and we've provoked them to anger and led them to discouragement. And we can avoid it. And we all done it. Don't go to your next party judging people there whose kids have a meltdown. You can also do it by, just yelling, using the loudness of your voice to make your point and to get your way. I think that, done too much, I think raising of a voice intentionally at times can be useful. I'll save that for another point later on maybe. But if the only way mom and dad communicate to kids and get what they want out of the kids is by raising their voice, it's probably provoking them to anger. There's also that MO of putting up the bad behavior until you blow up. That's not fair. That's inconsistent. Or even just unclear expectations, lack of instruction, you not realizing that you weren't clear in your expectations, thinking that what was in your brain didn't fully come out of your mouth into their little brain, and they fully got it. That could provoke them to anger and give them discouragement. Well, the alternative, verse 4, the other half, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. This is how they're to be brought up, which means they need to be brought up, right? They're not left to themselves. They're brought up, and they're brought up in a certain direction, in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Now, no doubt that relates to discipline next week. Instruction of the Lord, no doubt, relates to things like catechism, which you'll teach that as well, I believe. Instructing them in Bible truth and all that. But it also relates to instructing them, training them, bringing them up in how God would have us live. The Proverbs are so useful for that. There's a great book. I meant to bring it with me over here from my office, but red hardcover book. It's called Proverbs for Parenting. And what it is, it's simply a categorical collection of the Proverbs, a topical index of the Proverbs. So you look up anger, 15 Proverbs on anger. The tongue, it's just great. It's really handy. It does far more than just provide Proverbs for parenting. It sort of gives you a topical index of the Proverbs, which I know I need because they cover a lot of topics real fast. All right. Now, this whole thing, bringing them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord, it's hard. It feels constant. It feels impossible. In many ways it is. I mean, for us to bring them up in that way, that in some ways assumes conversion, which is not our responsibility. We can't actually affect their hearts. But as we're thinking about obedience, remember that opportunities abound for them to obey mom and dad or see their sin and be confronted and come out the other side. Opportunities abound. And so I've used this analogy before, that imagine you're plowing one of two rows on the field of their lives, right? One is obedience and one is disobedience. And you're going to be in both of these rows throughout their life. And they will be, right? Obedience and disobedience. But like the way a farmer in his auger digs deeper with each pass in a specific row, we want there to be more obedience than disobedience if we can help it. We want to, when they're in the disobedience row, we want to help them stop plowing there and not get comfortable to the depth of that. And we want to get them over here, and we want to plow there, and we want that to go deeper. We want it to feel more normal. We want it to feel harder to get out and go on the other side, right? Again, we'll be back and forth their whole lives, but parenting is a million opportunities to say, no, not this row, this row, and then to this row. And let's push. Let's get behind this. Isn't that great? And when that happens, notice the last phrase, verse 4, it pleases the Lord. And it's good for them. It's right. All those things of why obedience. Here's where we can insert those again. And here's where, when they do obey, when there is a modicum of obedience and honor, let's take advantage of that and affirm that row, right? Let's say, that's it. Thank you. Thank you for making that easy on me. Thank you. You know, hey, son, I have really seen you grow in this, in whatever it is. You point it out to them. You talk about it. Celebrate their obedience. So don't miss that opportunity to not just get them to obey, but then to celebrate obedience and honor when we do get to see it. All right. Let me do this. I plan to talk about Proverbs 22:6 for a little bit, but I'm wondering if time is best served if we don't do that. Let me do it quickly. Here it is. Proverbs 22:6. You've heard it before. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he'll not depart from it. So here's another thing on our notes. We're looking at Proverbs 22:6 just briefly. What does it mean? The way he should go. Well, there are these newfangled ways of interpreting that. Psychologists like to say, yeah, the way he or she should go is the way they've been made to go, who they are as a person. So train them up in the way that serves their personality best. I would say, I don't know if they were thinking that in the days of Solomon's Proverbs. And if you just think instead of just thinking that as a nugget of wisdom, think, what is Proverbs trying to do? What is the theme of Proverbs? Isn't it always talking about two paths, literally, right? There's this path you can go down, and it's trouble, and you can go down this path, and there's life and blessing. Pick this path, which is God's way. The way he should go, if we're thinking whole Proverbs, has to be that thing, not their inner whatever, personality test, whatever that is. The way he should go is God's way, the way of wisdom, all that wisdom entails in Proverbs. So train up a child in the way he should go. And then we've got this, and when he's old, he'll not depart from it. We have to say about that it is a principle, not necessarily a promise. So there are some parents who have done a darn good job of training up their child in the way that he or she should go. And in their teen years or 20s, they did not make the faith their own. They did not go God's way. And really, humanly speaking, you'd say mom and dad owe no responsibility for that. That is the kid's doing, not their doing. It wasn't owing to their parenting. So this is a principle, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he'll not depart from it. It's a principle, not a universal promise. It's not a guarantee, but it is generally true. And so it's possible to either expect too much of that principle in Proverbs 22:6, sort of like, Lord, I did my work, you do your work, you said they wouldn't depart from it. I did what I was supposed to, train them up in their way, in the way they should go. It's expecting too much of that principle. But it's also possible to think too lightly of that principle. You can think, yeah, well, who knows? It's a crapshoot. Train them up in the way he should go. Pastor Ryan said it's a principle, not a promise, so it's not a given. So does it really matter? Don't we believe in God's sovereignty around here? That's thinking too little of that principle. That verse, Proverbs 22:6, is in the Bible to encourage faithful training of children. It's a principle. It's generally true. It's often true. And just because there are exceptions doesn't mean it isn't generally true. Now let's bring this back to the funnel that you guys have learned a bit about, this triangle. Let's relate how let's put these things in relation to this triangle. So you remember, let's start at the bottom, actually. In this first stage, establishing authority is really the name of the game. But then there's a later stage, and these aren't black and white. I don't even like putting ages next to them myself. But there is generally a move from establishing authority to them developing responsibility, to parents one day facilitating independence. Right? So we want the progression to go this way, right? We want to start here, and you remember that this triangle represents freedoms. So that's very strict right down here, very little freedoms, but it's open up here, isn't it? It's pretty wide. So what's going on there, and when can that go wrong, or how can that go wrong? Well, some parents start later, the teenage now put into a 13-year-old is terrifying. And what do? They pinch at the top, right? The freedom out the with my sister growing up because she was 8 years younger than me and a little more on the wild side than me. And so my parents were looser with her when she was young, but then you're not doing anything. You're grounded forever and that kind of stuff. And it just didn't work. It relates to provoking your children to anger, doesn't it? Because expectations have just been turned upside down. Some parents also, another mistake that people make is assuming too much upon their decent parenting to, say, age 13. And so it was like maybe pretty good right here, these years, maybe even here, but then they just did this. Wide open. Whoa, that's a lot of responsibility for a 13-year-old. And just because this was good doesn't mean this is going to be good for a 13-year-old. So you can't presume upon good parenting to a certain age. It has to keep going, even if it looks different and should look different. So we as parents, as we're parenting them through these years, we should know where they are. And don't, like if you talk to your wife or your husband and you say, do you think we're in developing responsibility or facilitating independence? You've missed the point. This is much more fluid than like 3 steps on the way up to a platform or something. But you should generally know where your kids are and where your parenting is in relation to that, and where and when and how it should adjust in this next stage to come. And ideally, that's a fairly smooth process, not without vigilance, but done well. God's blessing, of course, we can't leave that out. The teenage years can actually be an absolute delight. I can say that. Our baby is 18 now. I've loved every stage of our kids' lives in different ways. And sometimes I had to figure out why this stage was good at all. But once you spot it, you're like, yeah, that's it. That's what we're celebrating here. That's what's unique about 5. That's what's unique about 10. And yeah, there's some difficulties with this age. But you know, before we had kids in their teen years, I just mean this as an encouragement and hope to those of you with little kids. I kept hearing, oh, just wait. I got 3 daughters. Oh, you just wait till you get 3 teenage daughters. Man, you're gonna be in for it, you know. And I don't know. I mean, I don't think we should speak like that to anyone, like assuming the worst is going to come. And it's just not a given. It's just not a given. It wasn't a given for us. We had unique challenges in teenage years, just like we had unique challenges in previous years, in previous eras. But this whole thing of teenage rebellion is in your kid's DNA, and it already is written in stone for their fate. I don't buy it one bit. Yeah, so if this is done well, teenage years can be wonderful. For one thing, you get some really sweet friendships right about here. That's cool. We've got a 23-year-old daughter who's now in grad school, moved back in with us, and she's like our best friend. She's the third of us, right? You know, she's the third wheel, and we love it. And man, it's really sweet. All right, enough about the funnel. Here's what I'm going to do in the time we have left. I'm going to rattle through the family parenting principles. And I have 16 of them. They'll go fast. I've got about 3 sentences under each of them. And I'll try to actually write down what I'm saying so that if you want to take notes, you can. Now, keep in mind, these are just one family's observations of us seeking to apply biblical truth, okay? Some of them you can actually put a Bible verse next to them, and you'd say, yeah, that's in the Bible. Of course you did that and we're committed to it. Other things were like, but we see this is a need. These are simply things that we, in our parenting, kept circling back to, kept talking about, and things over the years that we saw were actually pretty important and somewhat effective, and things that we found useful in talking to other parents about their parenting. So here we go. Number one, in praying about these things as early as possible. Start as early as possible. Start, if you're like Nick over here, you're not yet married, but he's here. He's in a parenting class. I can relate to that. I didn't start when I was single, but I think I was 22 without kids when I decided I was going to take our church's parenting class. I just thought, I got to get ahead of this. I don't know anything about parenting kids. So I just wanted to be around it and be around parents and begin to, it turned out it wasn't more than a year or a year and a half until we had a child. So before you have kids, as soon as you have kids, if both of those are X's and not check marks for you, didn't think about this early as you could have, well, right now, you've heard the saying, the best time to plant a tree is 30 years ago. The second best time to plant a tree is right now. So you haven't been strategic and thoughtful and biblical about your parenting thus far. That's all right, right now. And really, do this. Keep going, because our church needs older people to help them. I never knew that at 48, people would listen to what I have to say about parenting, but they kind of do sometimes. They're like, hey, tell us what you did. Like we have the secret sauce. We don't have a secret sauce. But, man, I'm really thankful for those opportunities, and I kind of want to stay in the game of talking about parenting, like teaching this class, so that I'm useful to parents in their 20s, and someday, Lord willing, so that I'm useful to my kids and my grandkids, and maybe even a generation later. All right, start thinking and praying as early as possible. Establish non-negotiables for your home. So these are rules. These are culture things. Ideally, you talk about this even before you have kids, but that's all right. If you have kids and you have never done this, then maybe it's time to sit down with your kids and say, we've got some new non-negotiables, and we're sorry that we didn't have these before, but we're going to have them now. And I don't know what those are, and they can vary from home to home. That's fine. This is us simply applying wisdom. It no doubt relates to the families you came from. It's what you and your spouse agree with. So you might say, we're just not going to raise our voices in this home, whatever. We're just not going to stand on kitchen tables. We're not. That's just out the, what Mom can say, we're just not going to play ball in the house, whatever. That was a Brady Bunch episode. So whatever it is, we had a few non-negotiables. Kids weren't going to say no. It just wasn't. We just decided, no, that's not going to fly. We're going to. Well, let me get to the third one, which really behaviors, and then see above, right? These non-negotiables that you decide, just don't lose the shock value. If you said, we're not going to tolerate kids saying no to mom, then it happens once, because it will happen, or more than once, but you just need to stay shocked. Oh no, we don't say that in this house. You don't say that to your mother. Understand? The way I did that was not out of control anger. That was me saying, this is emphatic. Put exclamation points at the front and at the end. There are some things non-negotiable. You're not going to do that to mom. Or, brother is not going to punch sister in the face. Non-negotiable. And we're going to make sure we don't lose the shock value of that when it happens, even if we're on the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th time of it happening. Fourth, mom and dad must be on the same page. We've already talked about that with exasperating kids. what's that called? Provoking them. We've already talked about that. So mom and dad must be on the same page, so don't disagree in front of the kids. Never let your kids pit mom against dad or vice versa. And it takes work to be on the same page. It really does. You know that already. And so you won't always be. So prepare to defer. Prepare to defer. You know what I'm saying? Guys, let me talk to you. You've got to give in to some of these things. And maybe every now and then she'll go with what you think instead of what she thinks. But every now, yes, pursue clarity and unity if you can come to a decision on how to handle this situation with your kids. But you know what? If she's home with the kids more than you are because of the necessity of your job, you might want to defer to her. She's actually on the job more than you are, in most cases. Where that's the case, maybe she does know best. Not always. So, yeah. And now I say to wives as well, be ready to defer. You're not going to always be on the same page, but you kind of, before the kids, you've got to be on the same page. So be ready to defer. Fifth, of course, start when they're young. We've already, like I said, start thinking and praying as early as possible. But in your hands-on parenting, in your expectations, in your communication of obedience and discipline, start young, which means this, for at least very young, don't remove all temptations. Here's what I mean. Yes, put your valuables up high because you don't want grandma's fancy thing that's worth $1,000 broken. Yes, things that can hurt them, keep them from them. Put the chemicals someplace else so they don't drink them. Yes. But if you, kid zone your house in such a way that there's nothing that they can touch and get in trouble about, there's nothing you can say, no, not that one, then you're missing all these opportunities. Remember, parenting's 1,000, 1,000,000 opportunities of this plowing lane or this plowing lane. And so we just said with our kids when they're little, even when they're crawling, yeah, the remote's going to stay right there, and they can't touch it. And that thing on the shelf, there are not going to be 50 things on the shelf that they can't touch because that's just too much for them to handle. But there are going to be 3 things at their level that we just tell them, no, not that. No, not that. So start young. Don't remove all temptations in the home. 6th, the tenor of the home. Tenor of the home should be, generally, warmth, peace, love, joy. Now hold on. The tenor of the home should be warmth, peace, love, and joy until it is interrupted with the disfellowship of sin. Right? So sin is an intrusion to that. Their sin, and your sin too, but we're talking about their sin right now. Their sin is an intrusion to that. It's okay for you to signal that's an intrusion. But then you deal with it, and then it should return. The tenor of the home should return as soon as possible to all those things. Warmth, peace, love, joy. So here's why this is really important. Here's why I'm putting a star next to this one. Because we're only talking about it for about 3 minutes. But this is actually the majority of your life in the home. The tenor of it. Not commandments, not sin, not discipline. Those things happen. Sometimes they feel like they're the majority. But actually they're not. If you think about it, think of the hours of life. Usually it's just, okay, what's the atmosphere here? And we just determined in our house we weren't going to let their behavior put us in a constant state of aggravation. So everything's good. Oh, this is not good. Let's deal with it. We deal with it. We deal with it all the way. Drew will talk about that next week, discipline. But then we're good. We're good. We always hugged afterwards. We're good. I love you. We're good. Now go back to playing. Have fun. Peace, love, joy. And it's going to stay that way until sin breaks the disfellowship. All right, got to go faster now. 7. Sorry, here. Be consistent. Sorry about my handwriting. But with common sense. Be consistent, yes, but with common sense. Aware of context, aware of their unique temptation. We were a few birthdays in, I don't know, maybe our oldest Autumn was maybe 7 before we realized their birthday is a challenge for them because it's all about them. And they're getting presents. And everyone's celebrating them, and people are coming over, and friends are coming over. And so we started realizing, hey, we should prepare them for this. So the morning of, we would often give the birthday speech. Remember, birthdays are hard. There's the birthdays, guard. It's not about you, et cetera, et cetera. We had a daughter that woke up with low blood sugar every time, and she just woke up in tears, and was to go wake her up with a piece of cheese in my hand. And I would start to gently wake her up, and I would put cheese in her mouth as she was waking up, because she needed protein for this to be successful. Otherwise, successful. Anyway, number 8, expect obedience. Expect obedience. No, they're not always going to obey, far from it. But sometimes kids know that their parents are actually expecting their failure. You ever tell your kid something thinking, I bet he's not going to do it? You ever watch The Dog Whisperer, Cesar Millan? Well, it's actually good for parenting. You should watch it. Doesn't it? That's what Ryan thinks of kids. They're just dogs that can be trained with a leash. So he just talked about how you just expect that the dog is going to do what you want instead of this fearful thing. I think sometimes our kids can feel our fear that they're not going to obey. Expect obedience. And yeah, you'll be proven wrong much of the time, but just have this atmosphere of, no, that's what we do. It's okay, you can do it. Number 9, teach kids to love brothers and sisters. We were talking about opportunities, 1,000 opportunities. Well, here they're put together with brothers and sisters in most families. And man, what an opportunity for them to learn to be friends. What an opportunity for them to exercise the second greatest commandment, to love others as yourselves, or love your neighbor as yourself. To work out conflict when that happens. What an opportunity that is. Take advantage of it. Parent their emotions. I've already said something about that, so I can leave that one alone. Parent their emotions. You can. Say this. With boys, generally you have to parent their anger. And with girls, you have to parent their sadness and roller coaster ride of emotions. And I'll say one more thing about it. When emotions seem to be getting manipulative, that just needs to be confronted as sin. So if you sense that your 7-year-old or maybe 5-year-old cries to get attention, cries to control mom and dad, cries to just put a stop in everything, stop it. That's enough. And that's okay. You can say that. It's back to the parenting emotions thing that we talked about earlier. 11. Get to the heart, but not with every single incident. Not with everything. Here's what I mean by this. You don't have enough time in your day to have a heart conversation about everything you have to deal with your kids. So that's me saying the emotion thing. They're crying and you can tell that they're manipulating you or trying to. Stop it. That's it. That's all that conversation needs. And hopefully they can come around and if nothing else, they're beginning to learn that that's not working anymore. Right? So get to the heart, yes, but not with everything. There's just no time in the day for all that. Just a fact. 12, know your personal leanings. In other words, some of us are more strict and some of us are more loose. Some of us over-scrutinize what just happened and under-scrutinize what just happened. Some over-scrutinize motives and some under-scrutinize motives. So know your personal leanings, and you just got to compensate. You just got to adjust a little bit. Just buffer that down a few degrees because you know you tend to be too strict or too soft. Distinguish between childish behavior versus sinful behavior. So childish behavior is kids. Don't treat it as sin just because it's a right? That's easy for me to do. Easy for me to do. Like, I'm really aggravated you did that. Why weren't you more careful? And I treat it like it's a sin. It's not a sin. But punching your sister in the face, that is a sin. That is not like spilling milk. All right. 15. For acute struggles and issues, memorize Scripture together so you can say it together. I can't tell you how often our family quoted Ephesians 4:29. Let no corrupt communication come out of your mouth, but only that which is, you know it. It's a great verse to memorize for speech towards others. 15. Keep evaluating. Mom and Dad, keep evaluating how it's going. How is it going with each kid? If necessary, use your dates for this. Yeah, I know. And if you don't, when you want to carve out some time for this, how is Caitlin doing these days? Are you seeing this? I'm concerned. Every parent should know of each of their kids at any given time what their strengths and weaknesses are now. And I say that as a parent with kids 18 to 23. You those things about them now. And I bet I'll be able to tell you those things about them when they're parents. And it doesn't mean I'm going to tell you what those things are. But I bet my wife and I will talk about it. And they're adult parents, just to nudge, ask a little question, be supportive here, that kind of thing. When they're younger, well, we got to figure out how to work on that. That's not going well. That keeps happening. I'm concerned about that. What's our strategy for that? Keep evaluating. And if you dare, 16, invite input from others, especially those parents that you trust who are a little further down the road than you are. Dare to ask them, what do you see that I don't see? What are we getting used to that we shouldn't be? What can help me? Give me a tune-up. Give me a little adjustment here. Those have been some. Yeah, it feels really awkward to begin that conversation, and you sort of white knuckle it, thinking, I mean, are they going to destroy me? Can I handle this? Do I really want to hear it? But if you actually want to be helped, people who are around you, who you trust, who are a little bit further down the road, who might be just doing 5%, 10% better than you are, ask them what they might see. Well, that's what I got. Well, I do have this. Don't forget that this is some of this stuff that has ever any human being to do, any creature of his to do. So stand in awe before God at this awesome, wonderful responsibility. It is big, it's massive, we can't do it, we feel inadequate, so pray and enjoy him. Enjoy him. I mean, it's a ride. So, yeah, buckle up and have fun and do your best and trust God for the rest. All right, we'll take maybe 5 minutes or so for questions.
What's the difference between obedience and making sure that they're following instruction properly? Good report, set exact clear expectations. This is what I want you to do. You get their attention. They explain what to them. There's no questions. You have them reiterate it. What are you to do?
I'm with you, man. I know.
They tell you what video games and the toys, or they just say, hey, you know what, screw it, I want to listen to mom and dad, I want to do what I want to do.
Yeah.
How do you tell?
I don't know. Number one, I don't know. Number two, I tend to expect more of kids than not. Number three, it's often a mix of emotion or mix of motives. So is it utterly malicious where they consciously say, screw you, Dad, we're not going to do it the way you say to do it? Probably not. But is it convenient forgetfulness? I mean, you were a kid once, Joe, right? I was. I remember convenient forgetfulness. So, yeah, ways of helping them remember would be consequences for not. Yeah. So for sure, I'd say this. You mentioned actually consequences. If you don't do it, this will happen. You just got to follow through with that. Or maybe the consequences aren't as severe as they should be. I don't know. But yeah, I wouldn't assume that is simple forgetfulness. I would assume that is convenient forgetfulness, which can be shepherded. But it takes work, and yeah, it takes strategy. Yeah, please do.
I think a lot of times it's carelessness on their part. They don't care enough. And it's starting to bleed into honoring, which honoring is often proactive. And if they're not proactively looking to honor you, well, that's a problem. They need to be taught. So I wouldn't say come down with the gavel on the first offense, but talk to them and say, but this is not honoring what I asked you to do.
That's good.
And that's part of your job as a child. Do I deserve honor? No. I'm just me. But the Lord says you're supposed to honor me.
Yeah, right.
So you have to be proactive and careful to obey and honor.
Yeah.
I think they kind of go together.
Yeah.
Especially at that age. When teenage boys, many years.
Oh, the forgetfulness. Yeah. Man, puberty puts them in space. They are.
Yeah, but it's still their job, their
Right.
responsibility to carry through.
Yeah.
It's our kids tend to, I don't want to say, they pick and choose when they want to honor and
Yeah,
when they
yeah.
don't want to honor. I mean, we have one specifically, she'll do everything correctly 100% one day when she wants to. And then the next time she's like, forget about it.
Right.
And it's just like, what the heck happened? You know, we praise her.
Yeah.
We congratulate her. We're like, oh, this is wonderful, great. This is what you want to have done. Oh, okay, great. And then out the door.
Yeah.
Keep at it.
Keep at it. Yep. Sounds like you're doing the right stuff, Joe. Just keep at it. Yeah.
So with young kids, so we have a 2-year-old. What about misdirection? So more specifically, Quinn will tell our boy, "Don't do this," and that's the expectation, and he kind of doesn't. He's kind of still whiny or not having a happy heart or anything like that. And then I will come and say, "But you can do this," and it's almost like halfway of what he wants to do. Is that wrong? Like I've seen other parents kind of do that too, misdirecting the kids, to get their attention off of some kind of fixation.
Yeah. Does mom think it's wrong? Yeah, then it's wrong. If mom feels undermined by that, then yeah. Yeah. If she feels like you gave them a halfway to obedience instead of obeying mom fully, then that's not helpful. Yeah. It's tempting, I know, but yeah. Good question. Yeah.
I tend to take like a transparent approach to a lot of things, and I'm intrigued by this funnel, right?
Yeah.
And so we don't have kids now, but I'm kind of imagining myself like with a young kid and like trying to motivate them to obey young by like showing them this triangle and kind of motivating them like, hey, look, once you get older, you'll be up here, but right now you got to stay down here.
They're gonna totally get that.
Yeah. You can make a carousel for the crib that just spins. Yeah. We'll tell you about this someday.
But like when they can get it, I think.
Oh, they will.
Yeah. Right. And part of it will be if you have multiple kids, the 5-year-old wants to do what the 9-year-old's doing. How come I can't do what he's doing? Well, he didn't do it when he was 5. So, yeah, And that might be the time to explain, it looks like this. I'm sure at some point, pretty early on, we explained that to our kids and just held our hands out and said, we're strict down here because we want to be able to let you fly later on.
Okay. So you do kind of
Yeah.
work your strategy as you go.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
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 I was just talking with my kids before we came here tonight about obedience and talking about this, and I just asked them all why do we obey, just to see what answers would come out. So it is good to kind of peel back the curtain with your kids and talk about these things, and so they kind of take ownership of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's both taught and taught. It is the air we breathe, but they also understand the imperatives of it, imperatives and the imperatives of it.
I think you find too, when you bring it up like at the dinner table, let's talk about this. It's like they all get the giggles.
They feel like,
It's what they deal with all the time.
and they feel like they're getting the coach's playbook.
Right.
What?
Yeah, so when you can talk about this is what we do here, they'll say, oh no, but when then this happens, then we do this. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so good to talk about it when it's not a volatile situation.
Yeah, yeah.
Just this is what we do.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say 8 on for sure. We were telling our kids what we were doing in our parenting. We were showing them the playbook. We didn't have any secrets. We wanted them in on it, and we wanted them to be good students of it. They're actually decent. They're better babysitters for that, and hopefully they're actually better parents someday for it as well. Yeah. One more? Or maybe 2 more. Okay, we'll do 2 more.
So we
Be
have
done.
number 4 as mom and dad on the same page,
Yeah.
and number 12 as know your personal limits.
Yeah.
When you're talking about mom and dad on the same page, like my wife and I, she always thinks our should be pretty similar for each infraction.
Yeah.
And that every human's different, everyone's going to be different.
Yeah.
One employer's not going to treat them the same as another employer, so they don't need to get used to that. They need to get used to this person requires this person requires this. Are those two kind of in conflict, or can you expand a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah, I think they're different models. Now, does each kid get exactly what the other one got? Where I thought you were going is how you discipline them, because we experienced that this kid needs a lot of discipline to get it, and this one needs a glance and melts, and like if we spanked her, she would be good. So differences with things like that, yes. I'm not sure I want to teach them yet about the inequities of the workplace. Maybe it's a bit much. That's just one guy's opinion.
Yeah, I would say in the bottom of that cone, that I would have less of that. I would say there'd be more equity
Yeah.
in the bottom of the cone when the kids are young.
That's good. Good
And
point.
then as it goes out, then you're identifying your kids' different personalities, different leanings, and even knowing that you can get a good glance is usually later
Yeah.
in their development. So then I'm thinking you're customizing some things.
Yeah.
Based on kids' personalities, kids' strengths and weaknesses. But I think the parents need to be on the same page about that customization, about what you do with this kid versus what you do with that kid. Parents need to be on the same page, because if mom's doing one thing, dad's doing another, you're asking for trouble.
Yeah.
No matter what age they're at.
Yeah. That's great. Claire, we'll end with you.
I feel like Sarah kind of touched on it, but just like the notion of like you're obeying me because I'm your mom. Like you're not giving me much feedback. You're not asking for all the questions or anything. I told you to do this.
Yeah.
I told you to do it. I just feel like I hit this point several times during the day where I'm like, I'm your mom. You know, it's like it feels really harsh coming out of my mouth. But
Yeah.
like, is there something like some kind of like go-to phrase that you could say instead of like I'm your mom? Just like
Because I said so.
it's just like we obey in this house, or like because we're hitting this place several times. It's just like I have lots of questions about that. Why? I was doing this. Like why
Yeah.
is that?
So we had rules for appeals, basically, and they get more chances for appeals the older they get. So why? And you got to sort of also, especially at a young age, you got to sort of figure out what's going on in their heart. We can't totally judge motives, but parents are pretty good at judging their kids' motives. They can be.
A lot of like I don't want to do what
Right. Right, so the why there is not, I'm trying to find out how the universe works, or I'm trying to get consistency in life, and the why is like, why do I have to do that? Who are you to tell me to do that? So that wasn't allowed. We would just, that would be disciplinable in our home. Just the question why, because it's not immediately. Immediately, happily unto the Lord. We're already not doing the immediately thing, so we got trouble.
Did y'all do like practicing? Like, we're gonna practice obeying, or like, how did you get? Because she's 3.5, like immediately to being like right now. I don't know. I'm just like, how do we
Yeah.
get from there?
So we had some hard resets at times. So when you've gotten some bad habits, when you want to implement something new, you go home and you say, I'm sorry, we haven't been as consistent as we should be. I think we should have been doing something differently. We're going to do something different now. This is the new rule. This is the way it's going to be. And yeah, I would actually play act it. Is that fair?
Yeah. You can say, Mama's going to allow you to ask some questions when I tell you to do something. We're not going to do that anymore. And I'm sorry, I shouldn't have been letting you do that, but I'm a sinner and I mess up too. But God has put me in your life to be your boss, so you need to obey. And it's kind of, when you talk to little kids, they listen. And they get a lot of what you're saying. And when you're just really straight with them like that, saying I messed up, but now it's going to change. And you know what? It's going to be hard for a couple days because you're going to have to learn this. And so am I. So let's work together because this is what the Lord wants. He wants you to obey. Then it might go well with you. You just paint the whole picture. And then just come to my house and say the more you say it, the quicker it comes out. I've said it a million times.
Yeah. Well, the good news is, you hear comedians say we're here all week. We're here all decade. So yeah, talk to Sarah. She's way more helpful on the real nitty gritty stuff than I am. Yeah, but there are a lot of people like the Hodges and Madzimas and the Jacobs that are great resources for you. So hopefully this parenting class is simply a diving board into other discussions. Did you get something real quick? Yeah, please do.
Something I enjoyed during the holidays is I just that parenting is learning to honor and obey your parents is good. It ultimately obey your sisters, honoring and obeying God, right? And I know I'm not going to save my kids, but I do like to encourage my kids to see the beauty of God all around them. So like when they're driving or whatever, like there needs to be an on-ness that they start to see that gives them that desire to obey.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's good. That goes back to the heart stuff.
Let me just add to that. In the degree of obedience, they sense the authority of mother because of the honoring of a holy God. And that's learned. And that's going to be demonstrated by your authority over them. So like you mentioned, hey, I'm appointed to be your mother by God, therefore you honor me. In some degree you don't have a choice. Yeah. And that just needs to be demonstrated in love and who God is and reverence and so on.
Yeah, that's a great place to land. So let's do this. We're later than we should be. That's my fault. But if you're able to stick around for 5 minutes of prayer, let me encourage that. If you maybe just partner up with one other person in the room and pray for these things, pray for God's help. I think that'll be a great way for us to end our evening. And then when you're done, feel free to walk out or chat with someone else. But this will be the end. Oh yeah, don't forget to get your kids. Yeah. All right, go for it. Why don't you pray?